The rain had a way of changing everything in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Not the dramatic kind that flooded streets or knocked power lines loose, but the steady, cold rain that seeped into your bones and made the world feel smaller, quieter, more honest. It was a kind of rain that exposed who people really were, because there was no escaping it. You either faced it or you didn't. Ethan Walker noticed her, because no one else had. Traffic moved past the abandoned bus stop, like it always did. Headlights cutting thin yellow lines of mist, engines humming with the indifference of people trying to get home. Most drivers slowed just enough to register the shape on the bench, and then looked away, their minds already offering excuses. Probably waiting for someone. Probably fine. Probably not their problem. Ethan told himself the same thing at first. He had just finished a 14-hour shift at a distribution warehouse on the edge of town. The kind of job that paid decently but demanded everything your body had to give. His shoulders ached. His hands were raw. His knees throbbed every time he pressed a brake. All he wanted was to get home, microwave leftovers, and check on his daughter before she fell asleep with a book still open on her chest. But as he passed the bus stop, something tugged at him in a way he couldn't ignore. The woman wasn't standing. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't shielding herself from the rain. She sat perfectly still on the bench, soaked through, her posture folded inward like she was trying to disappear. A small suitcase lay tipped beside her, one wheel spinning lazily as the rainwater pushed against it. And around her eyes was a dark cloth, already heavy with water, clinging to her face. She was blind. Ethan's foot lifted off the accelerator without him fully realizing it. He told himself he was just slowing down because visibility was bad, because the road was slick, because caution was smart. But his eyes stayed on her, and his chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. He drove past the bus stop. Then, 10 yards down the road, he stopped. The silence inside the truck felt loud, broken only by the windshield wipers scraping back and forth. Ethan rested his forehead against the steering wheel and closed his eyes. Just for a second, he pictured his daughter, Lily, bundled in her oversized hoodie, knees tucked under her chin on the couch, reading one of her library books out loud to herself because she liked the sound of stories filling the house. He imagined her sitting alone somewhere, cold and confused, waiting for someone who never came. That image landed like a blow. He shifted the truck into park and turned around. When Ethan pulled up beside the bus stop, he left the engine running. The heater blasted warm air into the cab, a small comfort he felt guilty keeping to himself. He stepped out into the rain, the cold immediately soaking through his jacket, and approached slowly, making sure his footsteps were audible against the pavement. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "I don't want to scare you." The woman flinched anyway. Her hands came up instinctively, fingers trembling as they hovered near her chest, and Ethan caught the sharp intake of breath that preceded tears she was clearly trying to hold back. Up close, he could see how young she was. Mid-20s, maybe. Her hair was plastered to her cheeks, strands sticking to her lips. The dress she wore was thin, meant for warmer weather, and it clung to her frame in a way that made Ethan immediately look away, not out of embarrassment, but respect. "I'm just waiting for the bus," she said quickly, her voice tight and uneven. "Please, I'm fine." Ethan swallowed. "The last bus came through a few hours ago. There won't be another one until morning." She shook her head, the blindfold shifting slightly with emotion. "No," he said someone would come. The way she said it told Ethan everything he needed to know, not about the bus, but about the promise. It was fragile, desperate, already breaking. Rain streamed down her face, mixing with tears she didn't bother wiping away anymore. "Do you know where you're going?" Ethan asked gently. Another shake of the head. "Do you have anyone I can call for you?" Her shoulders began to tremble, and the sound that escaped her then wasn't loud, but it was devastating. A small, broken sob that carried the weight of someone who had already asked all the questions and received no answers. "I don't have anything," she whispered. Ethan crouched a few feet away, lowering himself to her level without touching her. He kept his hands visible, palms resting on his knees. "My name's Ethan. I live about 10 minutes from here. I have a daughter at home. You don't have to come with me if you don't want to, but I can't leave you out here like this." She didn't respond right away. The rain filled the space between them, drumming against metal and concrete, stretching the moment thin. Ethan could feel the weight of the choice pressing on her, the risk involved in trusting a stranger when you couldn't see their face. Finally, she nodded. Her name was Claire. He learned that as he helped at her feet, guiding her slowly toward the truck, careful to describe each step, each curb, each movement. She clutched her suitcase with one hand and held the doorframe with the other, her knuckles white as she eased into the passenger seat. The heat hit her all at once, and she let out a shaky breath that sounded like relief and grief tangled together. Ethan placed his jacket over her shoulders without a word. As he drove, neither of them spoke. The rain softened into a steady rhythm, and Claire's breathing gradually slowed. She held her hands out in front of her, palms up, as if orienting herself to the space, memorizing the sound of the engine, the feel of the seat beneath her. About halfway to his house, Ethan felt something surface in his chest that he hadn't let himself think about in years. A memory flashed uninvited and sharp. He was standing in a hospital hallway, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a vending machine humming behind him. Lily was four then, asleep in a plastic chair with her head on his lap, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. A doctor was explaining things Ethan didn't want to understand, using calm words that couldn't soften the reality. His wife, Megan, was gone. Just like that. One moment a migraine, the next an aneurysm, the next a life permanently divided into before and after. Ethan remembered the way the world had gone quiet in that hallway, how everyone else kept moving while he stood there, stunned, holding a sleeping child who still believed her mother would come home. The memory faded as quickly as it came, leaving behind a familiar ache he had learned to carry. He glanced at Claire, at the way she sat so still, trusting him without knowing anything about him except that he had stopped. When they reached his house, the porch light was already on. Lily always turned it on when it rained, convinced it helped people find their way home. Ethan parked and got out, jogging around to open Claire's door and guide her inside. The warmth of the house wrapped around them instantly, carrying the faint smell of tomato soup and clean laundry. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, her hair in a messy braid, socks mismatched like always. "Dad," she called. "You're late." "I know, sweetheart," Ethan said. "I had to help someone." Claire froze at the sound of Lily's voice. "It's okay," Ethan said quietly. "That's my daughter." Lily bounded down the stairs and stopped short when she saw Claire, curiosity flickering across her face before settling into something more thoughtful. "Hi," she said simply. Claire smiled faintly. "Hi." That night, as Claire sat wrapped in a blanket on the couch, sipping tea Lily insisted on making herself, Ethan noticed something shift in the room. The house felt fuller. Not louder, not chaotic, just present, like something that had been missing had quietly returned without asking permission. Later, after Lily had gone to bed and Claire had fallen asleep in the guest room, Ethan stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the rain-slicked street. His reflection in the glass looked older than he felt, lines etched deeper by years of responsibility and restraint. He realized then that whatever truth Claire was carrying, whatever had left her blind and alone at a forgotten bus stop, was not going to leave him untouched. He had pulled over thinking he was helping a stranger. He didn't know yet that this moment would fracture him in ways he hadn't expected, or that the truth waiting to surface would force him to confront the parts of himself he had sealed away for survival. Outside, the bus stop sat empty again, rain pooling on the bench where Claire had waited. Inside, a single father stood in his kitchen, unknowingly balanced on the edge of a life that was about to change forever. Morning came quietly to Ethan Walker's house, the kind of quiet that didn't demand attention, but filled every corner if you listened closely enough. The rain had stopped some time before dawn, leaving the world washed clean and subdued. Wet pavement reflected pale sunlight, and the air carried that crisp smell that only appears after a long storm, sharp and new and almost hopeful. Ethan woke before his alarm, as he usually did. Years of responsibility had trained his body to rise early whether it wanted to or not. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock over the stove. Lily was still asleep, and somewhere down the hall, a woman he barely knew was sleeping in his guest room. The thought sat heavy in his chest. He moved carefully, slipping out of bed and pulling on a sweatshirt. As he padded into the kitchen, he stopped short when he saw Claire already sitting at the table. She was wrapped in the same blanket from the night before, her hands folded around a mug of coffee that had gone untouched long enough for a thin skin to form on top. Her blindfold was still in place, clean now, the fabric neatly adjusted as if it was as much armor as it was necessity. She sat perfectly straight, like someone bracing for impact, her face calm but drawn, exhaustion etched into every line. "Good morning," Ethan said gently. Claire turned toward his voice immediately. "I hope I didn't overstep," she said quickly. "I heard you moving around and didn't want to be in the way." "You're not in the way," Ethan replied without hesitation. He crossed the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee, then paused. "Do you want more? Fresh pot?" "Yes, please," she said, her voice soft. "Thank you." He poured carefully, setting the mug down where he knew her hands would find it. Their fingers brushed for just a second, and Claire flinched, not pulling away but tensing, as if touch still required permission. Ethan noticed. He didn't comment. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that felt fragile but not uncomfortable. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires whispering over wet asphalt. "I didn't sleep much," Claire said finally. Ethan nodded. "Nightmares." She exhaled slowly. "Memories." He waited. He had learned long ago that silence was often an invitation, not a void. "I kept hearing the rain," she continued, "even after it stopped. My mind wouldn't let it go." Ethan leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms loosely. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to." "I know," she said, "but I think if I don't, I might never stop hearing it." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "There's something you should know," she said, "about why I was there." Ethan's chest tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Claire took a breath, steadying herself, and then the words came, halting at first, then gaining momentum as if they had been waiting all night for permission to surface. "My husband left me there." The sentence landed hard in the quiet kitchen. Ethan didn't move. He didn't react outwardly at all, and that restraint mattered more than anything else in that moment. "We've been married for 4 years," Claire continued. "When I started losing my sight, he said all the right things. He told me we'd face it together, that I wasn't a burden, that he loved me." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. "I believed him because I needed to, because the alternative was too terrifying to accept." Ethan could picture it without trying. The slow erosion of independence. The way fear could masquerade as trust when you were desperate to survive. "It didn't happen all at once," she said. "That's what makes it worse. If he had been cruel from the beginning, I might have seen it. But he was patient, calculated." Her breathing grew shallow. "He started managing everything. Money, appointments, Calls. He said it was to help me adjust, and I let him because I was grieving my vision. I didn't realize I was also giving up my autonomy. Ethan felt something hot and sharp twist in his gut, but he stayed where he was. 2 months ago, I noticed things didn't add up, Claire said. Conversations he'd stop when I entered the room. Phone calls taken outside. When I asked, he told me I was imagining it. That blindness had made me paranoid. Her mouth curved into a bitter half-smile. I started to believe him. Ethan's jaw tightened. Yesterday morning, she went on, he told me we were driving to see a specialist, someone who might help. I want to believe that so badly. I didn't question the distance, the wrong turns, the way my phone disappeared from my bag. She paused, and for a moment, Ethan thought she might stop. Instead, her voice dropped, becoming quieter, heavier. He pulled over at that bus stop and told me to wait. Said he needed to make a call. Promised someone would come. The kitchen seemed to shrink around them. I waited, she whispered, for hours. The rain started, and I thought maybe he was delayed. Then the cold set in, and I realized he wasn't coming back, that he had left me blind, alone, with no money, no phone, no identification. Her shoulders began to shake. He wanted me to disappear. The words echoed in Ethan's head, colliding violently with the image of Claire sitting on that bench, soaked and silent while the world passed her by. I don't know how long I sat there before you stopped, she said. Long enough to understand what it means when someone decides you're disposable. Ethan pushed off the counter slowly and took a seat across from her. He didn't reach for her, didn't crowd her space. He simply sat, grounding the moment with his presence. You're not disposable, he said quietly. Claire laughed once, hollow. I know that logically. Emotionally is harder. Footsteps padded softly down the hallway. Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her hair sticking up at odd angles. She stopped when she saw Claire and immediately softened. Good morning, Lily said. Good morning, Claire replied. Lily climbed into her chair and glanced between them. Did something bad happen? Ethan opened his mouth to redirect, but Claire spoke first. Yes, she said gently, but something good happened too. Lily nodded solemnly, accepting this without further question. Bad things happen sometimes, she said. My mom used to say that's how you know the good stuff matters. Ethan felt his throat tighten as Lily focused on her cereal, humming softly to herself. Claire leaned back slightly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. Your daughter has a way of making things clearer, she said. She keeps me honest, Ethan replied. Later that morning, after Lily left for school, Ethan drove Claire to the police station. The building was unremarkable, beige brick and glass, but to Claire it felt monumental. Every step echoed with uncertainty, each sound magnified in a place that represented judgment and consequence. Detective Hannah Brooks met them in a small interview room. Her voice was calm, practiced but not cold. She listened as Claire told her story again, this time with more structure, more distance. When it was over, the detective nodded once. We'll help you, she said, with the department's assistance. They accessed Claire's cloud storage, financial records her husband hadn't known existed. The numbers told a story Claire had only suspected. Nearly $200,000 gone, transferred slowly. Methodically, the room felt colder. He started moving the money weeks after I lost my sight, Claire said. Detective Brooks exhaled. We'll issue a warrant. As they left the station, Ethan noticed Claire walking a little taller, even as the weight of the truth settled fully onto her shoulders. That afternoon, Ethan sat alone on the porch, staring down the street toward the bus stop, just visible at the end of the block. The image of Claire sitting there replayed in his mind, layered now with the truth she had shared. It didn't make the scene clearer. It made it heavier. He realized then that this wasn't just about helping someone in need. It was about confronting a level of cruelty that challenged his belief in the quiet goodness of the world. Inside the house, Claire rested in the guest room, the rain no longer echoing in her ears, but the memory of it still alive. And somewhere beyond the edge of town, a man who had believed he could erase his wife was about to learn that silence does not equal disappearance. Ethan stood, resolve settling into his bones. Whatever came next, he would not look away. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that surprised all of them, not because it was easy, but because it was steady. Ethan hadn't planned on anyone staying longer than a night. He told himself that from the beginning, repeated it the way people repeat things they're not sure they believe. But Claire didn't feel like a disruption to the household. She felt like a quiet presence that had always been missing, unnoticed until it was there. Mornings began with Lily rushing down the stairs, her backpack bouncing against her side, narrating her day before it even happened. Claire would sit at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug, listening intently, asking questions that made Lily pause and think. Not the polite kind of questions adults ask, but curious ones. Questions that made Lily feel interesting. Ethan watched it unfold from the doorway more than once, struck by how natural it felt. Claire didn't move through the house tentatively anymore. She learned the layout quickly, counting steps, memorizing textures under her feet, mapping the space in ways Ethan had never considered. The slight dip in the hallway floor, the creak near the third stair, the way sunlight warmed the carpet by the living room window in the afternoon. She adapted without fanfare. That alone unsettled Ethan more than tears ever could. On the fourth day, Claire asked him a question he hadn't expected. "What do you do," she said, "when you're not being a dad?" Ethan laughed softly, surprised. "I don't know if I have an answer to that." "I think you do," Claire replied. "You just haven't had a reason to think about it." The question lingered with him long after she retreated to the guest room for a nap. That evening, Ethan drove Claire to a mobility training center on the other side of town. The building was low and unassuming, surrounded by a quiet parking lot and a row of maple trees just beginning to turn color. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the walls lined with tactile maps and braille signage. Patricia Grant met them in the lobby. Her voice carried confidence without sharpness, authority without impatience. She'd been blind for over 20 years, and it showed not in fragility, but in the ease with which she moved through the space. "You're not starting over," Patricia told Claire as they walked together down the hallway. "You're continuing, just differently." Those words landed with more force than anyone in the room realized. The sessions were challenging. Claire returned home exhausted, mentally drained in a way sleep didn't always fix. There were moments when frustration slipped through her calm exterior, when a dropped spoon or a misstep brought tears she didn't want anyone to see. Ethan never rushed in. He learned to wait. One afternoon, while Lily was at a friend's house and the house sat unusually quiet, Claire sat at the dining table, running her fingers slowly across its surface. "Your table," she said. "It's handmade, isn't it?" Ethan looked up from where he was sorting mail. "Yeah, I built it years ago." "The grain," she said. "It's uneven in places. Intentional." Ethan felt something shift. "How can you tell?" "I used to design jewelry," Claire said. "Before everything." The words opened a door. She didn't rush through it. She described it carefully, as if reclaiming something fragile. "I worked mostly with custom pieces," she said. "People would come to me with stories, anniversaries, memorials, family heirlooms. I'd listen, then translate emotion into metal and stone. Texture mattered more than appearance, even back then." Her hands hovered in the air as she spoke, shaping invisible forms. When I lost my sight, I thought that part of me was gone too. Ethan sat down across from her, listening. At that moment, a memory surfaced in Claire's mind uninvited, but different from the ones that haunted her nights. She was standing in her studio years earlier, sunlight streaming through tall windows, dust motes floating lazily in the air. Her hands were steady then, confident, guiding silver into shape with practiced ease. Music played softly in the background, and she felt whole, independent, capable. The memory didn't hurt the way others did. It reminded her of who she had been. "I still remember how materials feel," she said quietly. "Heat, weight, balance." Ethan leaned forward. "Then you still have it." She shook her head. "I don't know if clients would trust work made by someone who can't see." "They trusted you because you understood meaning," Ethan replied. "That hasn't changed." The idea sat between them, tentative but alive. Over the next week, Claire began experimenting in small ways, feeling different metals, testing tools Ethan brought home from work, letting her hands relearn what her eyes no longer guided. There were mistakes, burned fingertips, misshapen attempts she quietly set aside. But there were successes, too. Lily appointed herself Claire's official assistant without being asked. She described colors with elaborate metaphors, explained shapes with dramatic flair, and offered opinions no one had requested. "This one feels brave," Lily declared one afternoon, holding a half-finished piece carefully between her palms. "Like it knows it's not perfect, but it doesn't care." Claire laughed, a real laugh, one that startled her with its ease. Ethan heard it from the garage and froze. It had been years since that sound had filled his house. That night, after Lily went to bed, Ethan sat on the porch steps, the air cool against his skin. Claire joined him, lowering herself carefully beside him. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. "I forgot what it felt like," Claire said eventually, "to think about the future without it hurting." Ethan nodded. "I know that feeling." He stared out at the street, at the quiet familiarity of it. Another memory stirred, gentle but persistent. He was sanding a crib years ago, his hands moving automatically while Megan sat nearby, her feet propped up, laughing as she folded tiny clothes. They argued over paint colors, over names, over nothing that mattered and everything that did. When that future vanished, Ethan had narrowed his world down to one goal: keep Lily safe. He hadn't realized how much of himself he had set aside in the process. Claire shifted beside him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing me as more than what happened to me." Ethan turned toward her voice. "You're not defined by what someone did to you." She smiled faintly. "Neither are you." The truth of that settled between them, heavy and freeing all at once. Inside the house, Lily slept curled around her book, unaware that two broken adults were slowly remembering who they were because of each other. Claire went to bed that night with hands sore from work, but heart lighter than it had been in months. Ethan remained on the porch long after, staring at the quiet street. He understood then that this wasn't just about helping Claire rebuild her life. It was about reclaiming parts of himself he thought were gone forever. And he knew, with a certainty that both comforted and frightened him, that whatever came next would demand more courage than simply stopping at a bus stop. The first letter from the district attorney arrived on a Thursday afternoon, tucked between grocery flyers and a utility bill. Ethan recognized the official seal immediately, the weight of it pressing into his palm before he even opened the envelope. Claire sat at the kitchen table across from him, fingers resting lightly on the wood, sensing the shift in the air before a word was spoken. "That's about him, isn't it?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah." He read it aloud slowly, carefully, so she could hear every word. Charges filed. Financial abuse. Fraud. intent to abandon, a court date scheduled. The language was clinical, detached, but the meaning beneath it was anything but. When he finished, the house felt unnaturally quiet. Claire didn't cry. She didn't speak right away either. She simply inhaled deeply, as if bracing herself against a wave she had always known would come. "So it's real now," she said finally. "It is," Ethan replied. She nodded once. "Okay." That was how Claire met most things now, with a single, deliberate acknowledgement. Not denial, not dramatics, just readiness. The days leading up to the hearing passed more slowly than Ethan expected. Tension didn't explode. It simmered. Claire continued her training sessions. Lily continued school. Life moved forward in small, stubborn increments, even as something enormous loomed just ahead. Ethan found himself watching Claire more closely, noticing the quiet ways anxiety surfaced. How her hands tightened when the phone rang. How she paused just a fraction too long before stepping off a curb. How sleep came harder, shadows returning to her dreams. One night, close to midnight, Ethan heard movement down the hall. He found Claire sitting on the edge of the guest bed, fully dressed, blindfold in place, her suitcase open at her feet. "I couldn't sleep," she said quickly when she sensed him in the doorway. "I wasn't leaving. I just needed to know where everything was." Ethan stepped inside and sat on the chair across from her. "You don't have to prepare for the worst anymore." "I know," she said, "but my body doesn't." She took a breath, then another. "There's something I haven't told you." Ethan waited. "I keep thinking about that bus stop," she said. "Not just what happened there, but how it felt right before." Her voice grew distant, pulled backward by memory. She was sitting on the bench again. The rain hadn't started yet. The air was thick, heavy with the promise of a storm. Her husband's footsteps faded as he walked away, his voice still close enough to reassure her. He told her to wait. He always told her to wait. She remembered smoothing her dress, adjusting her blindfold, trusting that familiar presence would return. Trust had been automatic then, reflexive. Then the first drop of rain hit her wrist. Then another. The memory tightened around her chest. "I remember thinking I should stand up," she said softly. "But I didn't want to disobey. I didn't want to be difficult. I didn't want to make him angry." Ethan felt something fracture inside him. "I waited because that's what I've been trained to do," she said. "And that terrifies me more than the rain ever did." The memory faded, unfinished, lingering like a bruise. Ethan stood and crossed the room, stopping a respectful distance away. "You're not waiting anymore," he said. "You're here. You're choosing." Claire nodded, but the words didn't fully land yet. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived cold and bright. The courthouse stood tall and impersonal against the pale sky, its steps worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old paper and polished floors. Ethan walked beside Claire, close enough that she could feel his presence without needing to reach for it. Lily stayed home with a neighbor, blissfully unaware of the weight carried into that building. When they entered the courtroom, Claire stiffened. The sound of movement, of murmured voices and shuffling papers, pressed in from all sides. Somewhere across the room, a familiar presence existed. She didn't need to see him to know he was there. Ethan felt it too, a sharp awareness that made his jaw clench. The hearing was procedural, dry, necessary. Evidence was outlined, numbers spoken aloud, intent established without embellishment. Claire listened without interruption, absorbing each word, each confirmation that what she had lived through was now officially recognized. When they stepped back outside afterward, sunlight hit Claire's face, warm and grounding. She exhaled shakily. "I thought it would feel like relief." "It will," Ethan said, "just not all at once." That evening, Ethan drove alone. He didn't tell Claire where he was going. He wasn't entirely sure himself until a familiar stretch of road unfolded ahead of him. The bus stop sat exactly where it always had. Empty. The bench still bore faint water stains, darker patches where rain had pooled. The sign listing routes and times was sun-faded, peeling at the edges. Traffic moved past without slowing, headlights flaring briefly before disappearing again. Ethan pulled over and turned off the engine. He sat there longer than he meant to. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine Claire here, alone, blind, waiting for a promise that had already been broken. The thought hollowed him out, not with rage, but with something quieter and more devastating. He understood now that the truth wasn't just what had been done to her. It was what it demanded of him. Driving away wouldn't have left her alone. It would have left him unchanged. When he returned home, Claire was in the living room. Lily curled against her side, both of them listening to an audiobook. Claire smiled when she heard his footsteps. "You okay?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I just needed to see something." She didn't ask what. That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The unfinished memory of the bus stop hovered at the edges of his mind, no longer hers alone. Justice was moving forward. Consequences were coming. But Ethan knew now that the hardest part wasn't facing what had happened. It was deciding who he would be because of it. And that choice, once made, could not be undone. The trial didn't begin with drama. There were no raised voices, no sudden confessions, no cinematic moments where truth burst through the doors and demanded attention. It began the way most real consequences do. Quietly, methodically, almost disappointingly plain. Claire sat at the witness table with her blindfold folded neatly in her lap. For the first time since Ethan had met her, she had chosen not to wear it. Her eyes were open, unfocused, a striking green that no longer searched the room, but refused to hide from it either. She had made that decision on her own early that morning, while standing in front of the bathroom mirror, hands resting on the counter, steady. Ethan sat behind her, one row back, close enough that she knew he was there. The man who had once been her husband sat across the room. He looked smaller than Ethan expected, not physically, but diminished, as if the certainty he once carried had evaporated under the weight of scrutiny. He didn't look at Claire. She didn't look at him either. The prosecutor laid out the evidence without flourish. Bank statements, timelines, transfers to offshore accounts, the life insurance policy taken out months before Claire had been abandoned, the attempt to construct a narrative in which a blind woman could quietly disappear without resistance. Each fact landed with precision. Claire listened without flinching. When it was her turn to speak, she rose slowly. Ethan felt his breath catch, not from fear, but from respect. This was not the woman he had found soaked and shaking at the bus stop. This was someone who had reclaimed herself piece by piece. "I lost my sight," Claire said evenly. "I did not lose my intelligence. I did not lose my will. And I did not lose my right to exist." The courtroom was still. "You believe my blindness made me weak," she continued, "that it would make me dependent enough to control, quiet enough to erase. You were wrong." Her voice did not waver. "You left me in the rain because you thought no one would stop. You thought the world would keep moving, and that I would simply vanish. But someone did stop, and because of that, I'm here." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She stated facts. "That choice," she said, "changed everything." When she sat down, Ethan realized his hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He forced himself to breathe. The verdict came faster than anyone expected. Guilty on all counts. The judge's sentence was firm, measured. Years in prison. Full restitution. Damages. No embellishment. No cruelty. Just consequence. Claire sat quietly as the words were spoken, absorbing them not as vindication, but as closure. When it was over, she exhaled a breath she had been holding for months. Outside the courthouse, sunlight spilled across the steps. The air felt lighter, even as exhaustion settled into her bones. "It doesn't feel like triumph," Claire said as Ethan guided her toward the car. "It doesn't have to," he replied. "It just has to be done." The weeks that followed were strangely calm. With the trial behind her, Claire threw herself into work. What had started as tentative experimentation in Ethan's garage became something more deliberate. She ordered specialized tools designed for tactile precision. She reorganized the space until every object had a place her hands could find instinctively. Ethan came home one evening to find her bent over the workbench, fingers moving with quiet confidence, shaping a piece of silver wire into something intricate and purposeful. "How do you know when it's right?" Lily asked, perched on a stool nearby, watching intently. Claire smiled. "When it feels balanced. When nothing is fighting against anything else." The first finished piece was a pendant, a tree, its roots curling upward to become branches, the lines textured and imperfect in a way that made it feel alive. Claire held in her palms for a long moment before handing it to Lily. "This is for you," she said. "To thank you for reminding me that I was still me." Lily gasped. "It feels strong," she said reverently, "like it won't break." Ethan watched from the doorway, chest tight, words spread slowly at first. A blind jeweler creating custom pieces by touch alone. Former clients reached out. New ones followed, drawn by curiosity, then staying for craftsmanship. Claire worked long hours, hands-sore, spirit-focused. She wasn't rebuilding what she had lost. She was building something new. One night, months later, Ethan found her sitting on the porch, the evening air cool and still. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped?" she asked. Ethan sat beside her. "I think about who I would have been." Claire nodded. "Me too." They sat in silence, comfortable, unburdened by the need to define what they were becoming to each other. Love, if it was there, remained patient. It had learned from everything that came before it. Inside, Lily slept soundly, her pendant resting on the nightstand beside her bed. Justice had been served. Lives had been redirected. Not through revenge, not through spectacle, but through steady choices made again and again. Ethan understood now that healing didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in moments, in work done with care, in silence shared without fear, in dignity restored not by force, but by persistence. And as he sat beside Claire, listening to quiet a life no longer defined by waiting, he knew the final chapter had already begun to take shape. Time did what it always does when it's allowed to move forward without resistance. It passed, not in dramatic leaps, not in montages or milestones announced out loud, but quietly, steadily, the way healing prefers. Seasons changed in Cedar Falls. Winter gave way to a hesitant spring, then to summer that felt warmer than Ethan remembered. The house adapted too, shifting to accommodate a new rhythm that no one had planned but everyone had accepted. Claire's business grew in ways she hadn't anticipated. What began as a handful of commissions turned into a steady stream of requests. Clients didn't come only for the story anymore. They came because the work spoke for itself. Each piece carried intention, weight, balance, meaning you could feel even before you understood it. She hired an assistant named Rachel, a recent art school graduate who handled the visual elements Claire couldn't. Photographing pieces, managing the website, coordinating shipments. The partnership worked seamlessly, built on mutual respect rather than pity. Ethan watched it all with a quiet sense of awe. He had spent years believing survival required narrowing your world, fewer risks, fewer attachments, fewer hopes. But somewhere along the way, without announcing itself, life had expanded again. Lily grew, too. She started writing stories at the kitchen table, pages spread out in front of her, tongue poking out in concentration. Her favorite character was a blind superhero who could see people's hearts instead of their faces. She read the stories aloud to Claire every night, adding details as she went, revising on the fly. "You're definitely in this one," Lily said once, matter-of-factly. "But you're not the main character. You're the reason the main character remembers who she is." Claire smiled. "That sounds right." Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. Love didn't arrive the way people expected it to. There was no sudden confession, no dramatic realization. It came in moments so ordinary they almost went unnoticed. The way Claire reached for Ethan's hand when crossing the street, not out of fear, but habit. The way Ethan automatically refilled her tea before his own. The way Lily referred to the three of them as "we" without hesitation. One evening, as autumn returned and leaves gathered in quiet piles along the sidewalks, Ethan and Claire sat on the porch, a blanket share between them. The air smelled like with smoke and distant rain. "I need to tell you something," Claire said. Ethan turned toward her voice. "Okay, I'm not afraid anymore," she said. "Not of being alone. Not of trusting myself. Not of staying." Ethan let the words settle before answering. "I'm glad." She smiled, then reached for his face, fingers tracing the line she had memorized over time. "I see you," she said softly. "Not the way people usually mean it. The real way." Ethan covered her hand with his. "I see you, too." They didn't rush what came next. They let it arrive naturally, without urgency or expectation. Love, when it finally stepped fully into the light, felt less like falling and more like standing on solid ground. 2 years later, on a mild October afternoon, Ethan drove a familiar road. The bus stop still stood at the edge of town, weathered and overlooked, its sign faded, the bench scarred by time. He slowed as he passed it, as he always did. Claire noticed. "That's the place," she said. Ethan nodded. "Yeah." He pulled over. They sat together in silence, the car engine ticking softly as it cooled. Traffic moved past without noticing, just as it had before. Claire spoke first. "For a long time, I thought this was where my life ended," she said. "Where everything was taken from me." Ethan looked at the empty bench. "But it wasn't," she continued. "It was where the waiting stopped." Ethan felt the truth of it settle deep in his chest. That night replayed differently now, not as a scene of abandonment, but as a moment suspended in possibility. A single choice made by a tired man who could have driven on. A single decision to stop, to notice, to care. The memories shifted, reframed. They drove home as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft gold and blue. Lily met them at the door, breathless, holding up a notebook. "I finished another chapter," she announced. "This one's about how heroes don't have to be strong all the time. They just have to show up." Ethan laughed. "Sounds familiar." Claire reached for Lily's hand. "It does." Later, as the house settled into sleep, Ethan stood at the window, watching the quiet street. Claire joined him, resting her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how close it all was?" she asked. "How easily it could have gone another way." Ethan nodded. "Every day." She smiled gently. "I'm glad it didn't." So was he. The truth that had once left him broken had done something else too. It had stripped away his excuses, his fear of disruption, his belief that helping meant sacrificing yourself completely. He had learned something different, that stopping didn't ruin his life. It revealed it. Somewhere in Cedar Falls, an abandoned bus stop sat empty under the open sky. Cars passed it every day without slowing, without noticing. But for one family, it would always mark the place where everything changed. Not because of cruelty, but because kindness interrupted it. and that, more than anything else, was a story worth telling. If you want the part 2 of this story, let us know in the comment section.